Alright, hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Color and Scribbles. My name is Rachel, and today I have a topic that I'm doing by request. So, I had a friend who asked me to talk about how to place a character in a scene, which a big part of that is composition, so I'm going to start with composition, and then towards the end of the video I'll talk a little bit about some other things that can help make your character look like it belongs in the scene that it belongs in. So, what is composition? Composition is the arranging of your elements on the page or on your painting, and what good composition should do is guide the viewer's eye to wherever you want it to look. So it should guide it to the focal point, or if there's multiple focal points, it should guide them in the correct order to those multiple focal points. So I have some examples. So these are some little sketches that I did real quick, and I kind of challenged myself to use these 6 basic compositions. So these are classic composition examples, and this is based on a list by Phil Straub, and I will post a link to his article about these below. So these are basic compositions, and these are kind of formulas that you can use if you're not super confident in how to compose a picture. And these are all super good. That's absolutely not to say that because they're basic they're bad. These are compositions that have been used for hundreds of years and are very impactful and very useful. So let's talk about them. See. Okay, so zoom in. Start with our first one here. Okay, so this is called an iconic composition, and a big thing about iconic composition is that circle this. This is the one we're looking at. Okay, so a big thing about iconic composition is that it uses symmetry and a lot of balance to draw attention to the central focal point. So as you can see, we have a lot of shapes following the diagonals, and all of these lines are basically contributing to guide the viewer's eye towards the central focus. This is a composition that, because of its symmetry and its balance, is used a lot in religious contexts. So you'll see a lot of old classic religious paintings that make good use of iconic composition because of the balance and the symmetry, which kind of adds a spiritual effect to it. So that is an example of iconic, and then get rid of all these lines. And then I also have some examples from classical paintings to kind of give you a better example than just seeing my little scribbly doodles. So this is a painting called Sermon on the Mount by Henrik Ulrich, and you can see that it used in a religious context, the shapes, these diagonals, these strong diagonals, the heavy use of symmetry, all of these lend a very spiritual feeling to the piece. And even though Jesus is not at the he's not dead center in the picture, the focus still goes to him because of these leading lines that we have, which is really what composition does. It creates leading lines that guide our eyes to the focus. So this is we've got the landscape in the background that's also creating some nice guiding lines, and then ultimately our vision goes back up to Jesus because we follow the crowd shapes up to where he's standing. So that's an example of iconic composition. The next one, boop, boop, boop. This is called a cross composition, and cross compositions are similar to iconic compositions but with less symmetry, so there's less restriction in what you can do with it. So the big thing with a cross composition is just that the character is centered on the vertical axis, and then usually there is a horizon line or something on the horizontal axis that creates kind of a cutoff point in the background of the composition. So once again, all of these lines that we have created, even if they're not literal lines, they're just shapes, all of these help to guide our eye to the focus of the character. And a cross composition is a good one for a heroic pose because we have a strong, powerful, centered character, and so it's very commonly used for a strong, central, character that you're trying to create. So it's commonly used in heroic poses. And the example that I have for this is called Wanderer Above the Sea of Mist by Caspar Friedrich, and I think you could probably argue that this is also an iconic composition, but for our sake, for our purposes, it's a cross composition. And once again, you can see that no matter where somebody comes into this painting, no matter where they're looking, there are shapes that are guiding their eye back to the central character, most notably the center lines and the horizontal lines of the ground plane. Alright, moving on. So, this next one we have is called a triangle composition. Now, triangle compositions don't necessarily have to be centered on the page. A triangle composition could technically be off-centered. Like, we could have a triangle based around this horizontal line instead, which is a strength of a triangle composition, is that it can kind of move around the page. It gives you a little bit more versatility, and it's also a good one for guiding your eye to multiple focal points, which we'll see in the example that we have. This is a painting called Madonna Prado, or Prado, by Raphael, and we can see the strong triangle shape here created by these characters. So the nice thing about this is that because of where the characters are looking, it naturally guides our eye to the ultimate focal point, which is Jesus in the center. So humans will naturally look where they see other people looking. So if you have your characters looking somewhere on a page, the viewer will also look where that person is looking. So at the peak of the pyramid, and also the character that has like the most breathing room, is Mary in the center, the Madonna. So naturally, when we first look at this picture, our eye goes to her. We look at her face first. And then because she is looking at this character, who's John the Baptist, we then look at him. And then ultimately, because John the Baptist is looking at Jesus, we make our way to Jesus, who's at the center of the composition, well, centered-ish. He's in the middle of the triangle, and he's the ultimate focal point of this piece. So by using this triangle composition, it really effectively, it keeps our characters kind of tight on the page. It gives them a unified strength and a unified shape, so we know that together all three of them are kind of grouped up and important all together, but ultimately it still guides our view to the main focal point, which is Jesus. So I'm trying to keep this video a little bit short, so that's why I'm going so fast. If you have any specific questions, feel free to drop a comment and I will answer those in the comments for you. The next composition is called an L composition. And an L composition is a good one to use if you have like architecture or anything else with your rigid structure in your background that's creating shapes for you. It is an internal framing method, so anything that you're putting in the page that is going to basically act as an internal frame. So in this example, we have these strong lines that are leading the viewer to our character. And another strength of this is that you can also, it's usually asymmetrical. I mean, it's naturally going to be asymmetrical, so it's a really good one to use in an asymmetrical piece if you want to balance like open empty space with filled up space. So it creates a nice balance, and it still draws the focus to your focal point, even if it's in an asymmetrical composition. The example I have for this one is Arrangement in Black and Gray by Whistler. So the first L shape we have is made by the curtain and the wall here. So this immediately reduces the parts of the picture that we're really looking at to the part that contains the focal point, which is the face. And then the verticality here of the character kind of acts in contrast to the edge of our frame, which naturally kind of draws attention to it. So even though we have another element on the page, this character who breaks through the line and who imitates the verticality that we have on the other side of the picture still draws our attention. So this L shape helps to focus us in, and then the mirrored shape of the character helps to, like, you know, pinpoint the focus of the piece. So that is, like I said, a good one if you want to have an asymmetrical composition. Another one that can work for an asymmetrical composition is the circle composition. And this is a composition that is also very good for action scenes or for showing movement, because circles are naturally, you know, more movie. Like they have a lot, like circles naturally imply more action than straight lines do because they're curved, and so it's really good for an action shot of some kind. In my example, we just have these trees kind of curving around the character, guiding our eyes back to the center where the concentric circles, if we were to continue making them smaller, would really guide us to the elbow, but because we stop here, it's enough to guide us to the character at the center of the image. Something else about the circle composition is that this is also, well, in this case, it's a good example of just how perspective lines can create a natural, strong composition. So in this picture, we really just have a one-point perspective happening. So all of these shapes are kind of leading to the center focal point, which is our character, of course. So one-point perspective can be a really effective tool for creating a simple, powerful composition. It will also make your character look like they fit into the environment and like everything else fits into the environment too. So if you're not using composition, or God, if you're not using perspective, sorry, I would definitely recommend that you try using some strong perspective, because that can just, it immediately naturally creates a focus for your picture. To get back to the circles though, I love this picture. This is called The Parable of the Rich Man by, let me check, by Rembrandt. And this is actually technically more of a spiral than a circle, and you can see the books and everything else pulls our attention right into the center of the picture. And the spiral in this case actually also adds to the story of the picture, which is that, you know, this guy is completely consumed by his money and he thinks of nothing else, and it's spiraling out of control for him. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that your composition can definitely add to the story that you're trying to tell with your picture. Alright, and the last one, radial composition. This is the one that I struggled with the most. This is supposed to be him cutting down some trees, and they're all falling in a radial shape. But in a realistic use of this example, radial is really good for like explosions and action scenes and anything where there's a lot of, you know, things flying away from something. So if you do a lot of action shots, radial might be a really good way to draw focus. Something to keep in mind is that this is also very similar to one-point perspective, but it doesn't necessarily have to follow the perspective of one point. Like, it could be somewhere else that doesn't line up with the exact you know, center of your one-point perspective. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the example for this, this one is really interesting. So this is Deposition from the Cross by Caravaggio. So here, the radial point, like the point that everything's radiating from, is actually, it's not the focal point. The radial is actually starting here and follows all of these shapes ultimately to land us on Jesus. And the use of radial in this case forces us to look at all of the other well, not forces, but it guides our eye to look at all of the other characters and then ultimately look at Jesus, so that we get the emotional experiences of each character before we get to Jesus. So that makes the emotional impact of the piece a lot stronger. So those are some 6 basic things, and then that is not to say that you have to use these 6 forms of composition, but like I said, they are a starting point, and I had a lot of fun just doing the examples for them. So, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about was just a few more quick and dirty tips. Some other things that you can use that will help make your character remain the focus of your picture even in a very busy environment. So this is the piece that I just finished, which was actually based off of those little sketches that I had. As you can see, I kind of changed the character up a little bit. But here, this is more of a dynamic composition. So the composition does not follow any of those traditional things, and it certainly doesn't have to. Like I said, those are a starting point. Dynamic compositions are actually more interesting to look at usually. So in this example, we do have a lot of things that are keeping the eye on the page compositionally, namely these trees that are creating a nice curvature around the character. So there is a little bit of circle composition happening, but it's not super strong. What is really drawing our eye here is the use of color, detail, and value on the character itself. So color-wise, you can see that the color of the character is very different from the background. We've got green background, and then immediately on the character we have the contrasting color to that, or the complementary color, red. So that immediately draws our eye to the red, because the background is pretty monotone and the character is the opposite color of the background. So color is a really good way to help your character pop up the page and to help them be the focal point of your piece. Another way to do that is using detail differences. So even though this is a very busy background and there's a lot happening, the level of detail and like the refinement of the detail on the character is a lot higher. So our eye is also naturally drawn to places that have more detail, because we tend to focus on the things that are like in the most focus, basically, and detail implies focus. So we naturally are drawn to that. And then lastly, the thing is contrast and value. So this actually acts in two ways. Firstly, the character itself has a higher value differentiation. Like there's more contrast in the values on the character. It goes from like very dark black in this area to almost white in some places. So there's a lot of contrast within the character that the rest of the environment does not have. But beyond that, the value of the character also stands out from the background. So we've got a darker background, and then we've got all of this brightness happening on the character. So that creates contrast. So these are some ways, in addition to using a good composition, that can help your character stand out and jump off the page. Yeah, sorry if that was a little fast. I was trying to keep the time down a little bit. If you have any, like I said, if you have any questions or if there's anything that I discussed that you would like me to talk about more specifically, let me know in the comments, and I will do a follow-up video. Yeah, and like I said, this was a request video, so if you have anything that you would like to see me talk about, just drop a comment and I will do that for you. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. Please remember to like and subscribe, and come back next week for next week's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great week. Bye-bye.